Roz settled into a routine, taking care of the girls, running the house, and making sure everything was in order, and attending the church she and Reese were married in. That was pretty much her life now. At first, she tried to get back to some sense of a normal life, but she couldn't stop the pain in her heart from growing. It was ironic. She had destroyed her perfect life trying to find what was missing from her perfect life. Now that she had driven Reese away, she found his absence was creating a hole that couldn't be filled. She realized that now something truly was missing from her life. With Reese gone, her life was a shambles and she no longer cared. She stopped socializing with the people she once shared so much with. Sabrina and Paul had finally divorced. She had been quite active in the social scene and always tried to get Roz to join her, but Roz wanted no part of it and made that clear to Sabrina. She blamed Sabrina in part for agreeing to sell her shares to Reese without telling her, even though she understood why she did it. Their relationship slid just like everything else in Roz's life now. She also quit the counseling sessions, but promised to continue to take the pills. She went back occasionally only to renew the prescriptions. As time passed, it was clear to the two girls that their mother was falling more and more into a dark depression. She did nothing wrong as a mother and homemaker. She always had dinner ready for them after school. She had clean clothes in their closets, and all of the routine duties were meticulously completed, but she made no effort to do anything else. When they had school functions, she would drive them to and from but never attended, and if they needed an adult, she called Sabrina and insisted she fill in for her. She showed no interest in any of their activities and made no objection if they wanted to have a pool party or barbecue with their friends, so long as they made all of the plans and arrangements. She was there and made sure nothing bad happened, but she did not mingle or talk to their friends while they were there. Any attempt to include her were soundly rebuffed. She rarely left the house anymore except to do some shopping and an occasional trip into town to visit friends. These trips were infrequent and were normally made later in the evening. Other than these few things, Roz was slowly withdrawing from everyone. At the urging of JC and Jada, the minister of their church came to the home to talk with Roz. He was a young man and very personable. He liked the girls and most of their friends and knew they were good kids, never in trouble. He couldn't understand why they were worried about their mother since they obviously came from a loving home. But he agreed to visit as part of his outreach programs. JC led Reverend Parker into the den where Roz was sitting, listening to music but otherwise just sitting silently. Her face was slack and her eyes were unfocused, temporarily frightening the Reverend. He looked at her for a moment before softly speaking. "Ms. Del Gorio, it's Reverend Parker. May I talk with you for a while?" Roz flinched as he began to speak and some life came into her face. She turned to see him standing there. She rose and faced him as JC left the room.
I'm sorry, Reverend.
"Welcome to my home. Did you say something?" "I asked if I could speak to you for a while. You daughters invited me over. They are worried about you. May I sit down?" "Of course, please have a seat. But there is nothing to worry about. I'm fine, really. What did you want to talk about?" Roz sat back down and seemed to wait for the Reverend to speak. She made no effort to be polite, instead looking almost resigned to this interruption in her world. "I just wanted to see how you were, and if I could be of any help. Is there something bothering you?" She looked at him with an expression of what appeared to be pity. She smiled briefly before she answered him. "Nothing that you can help me with. I made a very bad mistake and betrayed my husband, and now I have to live with that. Unless you can change that, there is nothing anyone can do." With that, Roz turned away and again looked at something only she could see. She simply seemed to go away, and that scared Reverend Parker more than anything else. He made several more attempts to talk to her, but her responses were either abrupt, or she simply ignored him until he finally gave up. He left the den and went into the kitchen where the girls were patiently waiting. "I'm afraid I can't help your mother. I think she needs professional help. If you would like, I can recommend someone. Are you girls all right here? Do you need anyone to come in to help you? Mom's fine about everything else. She's never neglected us. She does everything around the house. She fixes our meals, she does our clothes, she keeps the schedules and appointments, but she won't talk to us and doesn't seem to care what we do. She won't let us have wild parties or anything like that, but she won't talk to our friends when they're here. We don't know what to do. I would talk to your dad first. See if he can help you. They may be divorced, but I'm sure he cares about you. Let him know what's going on and that you're worried and frightened. I think you should call him as soon as you can. I am worried about your mother." He stayed for a short time, just calming them down before leaving. He'd let it go for a while longer, but something had to be done and done soon. He made them promise to talk with their dad and then to let him know what they decided. He left with a heavy heart, fearing things might not get better. When Reese called that evening, JC and Jada both told him what was going on with Roz. They finally made it clear to him that they were scared for her, and they were afraid that something bad was going to happen. They cried at first when he said he didn't want to get involved, and finally convinced him to come back as soon as he could. They wanted him to come right away, but he said that it would be a week or so before he could. He would let them know for sure later. They had to be content with that. He finally told them to tell Roz that he would come for dinner the Tuesday after next. Maybe that would cheer her up. They agreed immediately and made final arrangements. The girls discussed it between themselves and decided to tell Roz the next morning before leaving for school. They hoped that it would help boost her spirits if she had something to look forward to. A family dinner should get her moving. They went to sleep feeling better about everything. If Dad could help Mom, they would be grateful. Dad was the fixer in the family. He could fix this. As planned, the next morning at breakfast, Jada waited until Roz sat down with her usual cup of coffee for breakfast. "Mom, we have some good news. Dad's coming home to have dinner with all of us next Tuesday. He wanted to know if that was okay." The change in Roz was immediate and unmistakable. She stopped with the cup halfway to her mouth as she turned to look at Jada with her brow wrinkled in confusion. She put the cup down carefully as she asked Jada to repeat what she had just said. "I said, Dad wants to know if it's okay for him to come have dinner with all of us next Tuesday. Is it okay?" Roz paused for a minute as she considered her daughter. She seemed to be trying to determine whether Jada was playing a trick on her. When it became clear that Jada was waiting for an answer, Roz understood that this was real. "Of course it's okay. Did he call you last night? Is that when he mentioned dinner? What else did he say? I should talk to him if he calls again tonight. Will you let me know when he calls?" "He said he would call you tonight instead of us. He'll call on our regular phone, not the one for JC and me." Jada glanced at JC with a smile as if to say, "Told you. Well then, that will be fine. I'll talk to him then and see what his plans are. Now, you girls should get ready for the bus. You don't want to be late." Since the girls got themselves off to school every morning without Roz even noticing, they thought her comment a positive one. They both left with smiles on their faces and hoped that their mother would be all right again. Roz couldn't get her mind around it. Reese was coming home? He was coming to dinner? She hadn't seen or talked with him for several years, and now he was coming to dinner. Jada said he was going to call tonight. He was going to talk to her, not the girls. As she thought about seeing and talking to him again, her heart began to pound and she had to sit down before her legs gave way. Could this be the beginning of the end of her torment? Could he have forgiven her? Maybe they could at least be friends again. That was worth anything. She still loved him completely, but she accepted that he would never again be her lover and husband. Friends was all she could hope for, and it was enough. She could live with that. Roz got up and wandered through the house looking around. It was a mess. She had to clean it. She had to make things perfect, like her life before she ruined it. Stop. Stop thinking like that. He was coming home, so stop this and make things right. She began to gather the things she would need and began making the house perfect. When the girls came home, they were surprised to find dinner on the stove, the smells coming from the various pots and pans delicious and inviting. The table was set, but Roz was nowhere to be found. They put their books and packs away and went to their rooms to change, but stopped when they heard singing coming from their mother's room. They tiptoed down the hall and peeked in to see Roz sitting at her vanity combing her hair. She had put makeup on for the first time in a long time, and her hair was shining with a fresh washing and curling. She looked like another person. They ran back to their room smiling and giggling. It seemed that their mom was back. Dinner was altogether different but pleasant. Instead of just dishing out their plates and then going into the den, she joined them. She served a delicious meal of baked chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans and bacon, fresh baked biscuits, and a fresh fruit salad. They enjoyed the meal as well as conversation. Roz asking about their day, their activities, and their plans. It was as it used to be before Dad left. Jada and JC shared looks that said their plan had succeeded far beyond their expectations. It was the first really fun meal they had since longer than they could remember. Since it was a Tuesday night, the girls had a regularly scheduled meeting of one of their mini clubs, so Roz agreed to drive them and pick them up. Recently, her normal reaction was to let someone else do the driving, so the girls told her that they had already scheduled rides. Roz was surprised, but then quickly understood that she had not been an active part of their lives for some time, and apologized to JC and then to Jada for her seemingly antipathy. She felt tears come to her eyes, but the girls quickly told her that they would rather go with her, and they could call to cancel their rides. That seemed to please Roz, and she happily cleaned the table while they got ready. With the girls gone to their meeting and the house cleaned top to bottom at least twice, Roz nervously waited for the phone call from Reese. For the first time, she wondered where he was and how he was living. She was surprised to realize she knew nothing about his activities over the past 2 years. She stopped asking the girls when her depression became severe, and she had not tried to find out. The girls had stopped talking about him when it was clear that it just upset Roz to hear anything about him. Thus it was that she waited for a call from a man that she hadn't spoken to in several years. A man that used to be her husband and who was living somewhere else and perhaps with someone else. She decided to take one of her pills to calm herself down. She hadn't taken anything since the girls told her about Reese. At just after 8 o'clock, the phone rang and Roz froze. She couldn't move for the first 2 rings, but finally found the courage to pick up the receiver. Hello? Hello, Roz. It's Reese. How've you been? Hello, Reese. I've been okay. It's good to hear from you. How are you? And where in the world are you? I guess I lost track. Well, I'm fine and I'm currently in Costa Rica, in San Jose. I've been here for the last 8 months or so and I have to tell you, I love it here. I'm staying with a couple from the States that I met. He's retired and they moved here about 3 years ago. It's really great. I think you would love it. I don't know about that. I was never one for roughing it. I always like the creature comforts, as you know. Well, anyway, I'm going to fly back to the States, leaving here Friday, and I should be back in Springfield by Sunday evening. The girls said it would be okay if I came for dinner, and we could talk? Is that still okay? Roz paused as her heart was beating so hard that it made her uncomfortable. She was waiting for the pill to kick in and calm her down. Maybe another one. Of course. I would love to have you come to dinner, and so would the girls. Can you come Monday evening? I know the girls have things on Tuesday and Wednesday, so Monday or Thursday would be fine. Whichever is best for you. I have no plans, so I'm open. Monday would be perfect. I'll call in the afternoon to confirm and to find out what time to come. Should I bring anything? No, just come as you are. You might plan on about 6:30. We usually eat about that time. Good. It's set then. It will be good to see you again, Roz. It's been too long. I would love to see you again too. Goodbye, Reese. Roz hung up quickly before she could say something stupid. She thought she had done well just to keep it together. His voice sounded so good, like nothing had changed. Of course, she heard his voice in her dreams all the time. She saw his face everywhere, and she still found herself expecting him home at dinner time. Even after all of this time, she hadn't accepted the loss of her husband, her friend, and her lover. For her, the past years had been a constant reminder of her stupidity, her greed, and her shame. She continued in her depression even with the damn pills. They made her so tired that she had to find something else to ease the pain without driving her to bed. She had made a connection with one of the delivery guys, and he had put her on to a source for OxyContin, a pain pill. She found that 1 or 2 of those in the evenings when things were so bad put her at ease and made sleep welcome. She had read up on them and found that they weren't physically addictive, but she had to be careful with the dosage so that she would not have withdrawal symptoms from the psychological addiction. Once in a while, when things got too bad, she took both the OxyContin and the Zoloft. That really put her into the zone. No problems then. The phone call lifted her spirits, and she began to make plans. She wanted everything to be perfect, and she began to plan the dinner. This is what she did well, and it was second nature to her, so the pills didn't affect her as she began. She worked solidly for the next 2 hours until it was time to pick up the girls. She answered all of their questions about the phone call from Reese. She pretended to be calm, but they knew better, and they teased her unmercifully. She welcomed the feeling of really connecting with her girls. They had a fun evening of girl talk and plans. It had been almost a year for the girls, as well, so they were excited to see him again. Over the next several days, Roz put everything together, making several trips into town to pick up the odds and ends that she found she couldn't do without. She filled the days with preparations, just as she used to do for her business, but this was far more important to her than business. She had the menu for dinner, she had candles, the house was spotless, and the wines were selected. The girls would each have a glass. She had promised them. Dessert would be a choice of chocolate cake or fruit with whipped cream. To be certain that everything was perfect, she arranged for everything to be delivered to the house by 5 o'clock Monday evening. She had decided at the last minute to have everything prepared by the best kitchen in town and used her contacts to make arrangements. She was taking no chances. Now she had only to wait. Roz made sure she had worked her way down on all of her pills so that Sunday she had taken nothing. She was so high with anticipation that she felt no need for anything. She was happier than she had been for over a year. She was anxious to see and talk to Reese. They had said so little to each other before the divorce and nothing since. She had so much to say and so many things to apologize for that she had been practicing in front of her mirror for days. She felt scared but ready. She wanted him back in her life, even as just a friend. She had hope for the first time in so long. Monday arrived, and she was nervous but ready. The girls went off to school and Roz made final preparations. The wines were chilling, the table was set, the china was clean and the silver polished. She had to admit, it looked wonderful. She waited. At 4 o'clock, the girls got home from school and went up to finish their homework so as to be free the rest of the evening. Roz helped them pick out clothes for dinner, and she asked their opinion of her choice. They had suggestions, and she accepted most of them. They waited. At 5 o'clock, the food came and Roz went over everything with the delivery man to be sure things were as ordered. Once satisfied, she took the entrees into the kitchen and put them in the oven on warm. She made sure all the sides were transferred to the good serving dishes and the desserts were in the fridge. She made a final check and was ready. She went in to be with the girls and they waited. At 5:45, she went into the dining room to light the candles and make a final check of the settings. Everything was right, and the table looked perfect. She lowered the lighting to allow the candles to show and went back to be with the girls. They waited. At 7 o'clock, they all were becoming concerned. Reese hadn't called to confirm, and they couldn't understand why he wasn't there. He said 6:30, and he was never late for anything. And anyway, he hadn't called. They waited. Finally, at 7:30, Roz called the number she had for the local airport. She thought Reese had said he used that airport to fly in and out of when he was learning to fly. Maybe they had some information or could tell her who to call. She was finally connected to a Mr. Phillips, one of Reese's original instructors. She explained the situation and Phillips told her he would make some calls and get back to her. She thanked him and hung up. They waited. 45 minutes later, he called back. The news was not good. "Rosalind, it's John Phillips. I called the FAA and got some information. It seems Reese left Costa Rica early Friday morning and he was scheduled to land in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, before continuing on to Belize and then to Mexico. There is no record of his landing at any of those destinations Friday or Saturday. The word was passed on to begin searching for him, but they wanted to wait to be sure he didn't land somewhere else. He wasn't required to file a detailed flight plan since he was flying in sight most of the way. I'll stay on it and keep you informed. I think it's far too early to be worried, so please be calm."
Ok.
"Thanks, John, and please call as soon as you know anything." Roz hung up and told the girls of the conversation with John Phillips. They all tried to remain calm, but it was difficult. Since it was early, Roz decided to go ahead and eat and try to stay on plan. Maybe the routine would be good for them all. Dinner was quiet even though they tried to stay positive. No one ate much, and the wonderful dinner went pretty much to waste. No one wanted dessert, and the wine wasn't opened. Roz finally decided that they had to talk about it, so she began. "You know your dad. He's tough, a great pilot, and if he had problems, he'll be able to fix them. Just trust him."
Ok.
"Mom, he's late. He's never late. If he was going to be late, he would have called us. You know that. He's in trouble somewhere. He didn't call because he's somewhere he can't get to a phone or his cell is out of range. Just be patient. He'll come home. He has to." Roz thought to herself. "This can't be the end. He called me. Damn it. He was coming back to me. I won't accept anything bad. He'll be here. Let's not think bad things." Just wait and be patient. With that, they all went their separate ways to wonder and worry in their own ways. There were no further phone calls that evening, so they finally went to bed to wait till tomorrow. They would have more news then. The following morning, Roz called John again and asked him for an update. He told her that they had air patrols out looking, and that Reese had landed in Honduras as scheduled and took off an hour later. He wasn't reported being seen in Belize, and no one had reported in any place else on his flight path. He was officially reported as missing now, and the authorities were on it. John told her to be patient. If he had crash-landed, the plane he was flying was a good one and had a good safety record. He may have been grounded for many reasons and in a place where he couldn't call. They just had to wait till he was spotted. Roz hung up with a bad feeling. The girls were right. Reese would have found a way to call if he were able. He was lost. That was official now. She needed a pill now. Nothing was heard from the searchers for the next 3 days. They had cut back on the number of search flights, and bad weather made it next to impossible for anyone on the ground to be of any help. It was late Friday night when they began to believe the worst-case scenario was no longer just a scenario. It was real. Reese was dead and not coming home. The house was a quiet and somber place that weekend. The girls worried, of course, but they saw the rapid slide in Roz, back to where she had been for so long. They tried talking to her and asking her for her help, but it was no use. She had retreated back into her shell. She was gone from them again. Reese was their last hope, and he was not coming home. As she disappeared more and more into her shell, the girls lost what hope they had. The following Monday, they returned to school, not knowing what else to do. Roz never noticed. It was Wednesday night. The girls had just gotten home from school, and there was no dinner on the table when they came in. No sounds from the house. They thought Roz was out visiting one of her friends. JC started a light supper for them all and told Jada to get changed and do her homework. She would finish dinner and let it stay on warm till they were ready and Roz returned. JC had her room at the back of the house, looking out on the lake. She picked it because of the view. It was all the way back, and she had to pass her mother's room on the way. As JC walked toward her room, she glanced in to see if her mom's bed was made. She never made the bed if she had been in one of her napping moods. Her depression often drove her to stay in bed for hours during the day. JC saw that the bed was unmade and continued walking but brought herself up short. Was that her mom? She wasn't sure, so she reversed her steps and looked in. It was her mom, and she was fully dressed and laying on the floor next to the bed. JC ran to her and looked to see if she was breathing. She was, but slowly. JC felt her pulse, thin and very slow. As JC rose to call 911, she saw a small bottle. It was empty. She went to the phone on the bedside table to call and noticed another. She knew what had happened. Her depression had gotten to her. JC got the 911 operator and told her to have an ambulance get there as soon as possible. The operator asked her what the problem was, and she told her. As she answered her questions, she heard the sirens of the ambulance in the distance. Without realizing it, JC had been talking to the operator for several minutes, long enough for the word to get out and an ambulance on its way. As JC was talking on her mother's phone, she heard the other line ring and yelled at Jada to take that call. It was their line. It could be something about their father since this line was tied up, and she couldn't stop to tell Jada what had happened. She could only wait for the ambulance. As she answered yet another question from the 911 operator, Jada flew into the room, yelling at JC to come quick. They found Dad. He's okay, and they found him. Jada suddenly stopped talking as she saw her mother laying on the floor. She dropped to her knees beside JC. What's wrong with Mom? What happened? Did she fall? JC, what's wrong? JC quickly filled her in on the phone call to 911 and asked her to repeat what she said about their dad. Jada was silent for a minute, but finally got out that it was John on the phone and they found Reese. His plane had developed engine problems, and he had made a forced landing in a remote part of Belize. He had to walk for almost 7 days, living on berries, wild bananas, and drinking water from the streams. Fortunately, he knew what he could and couldn't eat, and he was fine. Dirty and tired, but fine. He wanted to call immediately, but they had no phones where he was found. It took another day and a half to get to someplace where he could call. The message was passed to the FAA and finally to John. John said that Reese should be back in the States by now, and hopefully he would be back in Springfield by tonight. He would call with more information as soon as he had any. Just then, the paramedics came running up the stairs with a stretcher and their kits. They quickly pushed JC and Jada aside. They were silent for several minutes before one of them spoke. I have a pulse. I have a pulse, thin and thready but there. She's still breathing, but she'll need to be intubated. Give me that ET. Thanks. There. I'm in.
Oh cool, be here.
Good breath sounds. Her color's coming back. Stronger pulse now. Okay, she's ready for transport. The man and woman lifted Roz with ease and placed her on the stretcher. They lifted and were out the door and halfway down the stairs before the girls were able to pull themselves together. They followed the team to the ambulance and waited as they put Roz inside. As the woman made ready to shut the door, JC stopped her. I'm going with you. She's my mother and I'm going. She turned to Jada and told her to call Sabrina and tell her to come over and pick her up and then to come on to the hospital. As she stepped up into the ambulance, she continued, I have my cell phone, but you should call John. Go. Call Aunt Sabrina. With that, the door closed, the ambulance left in a squeal of rubber, and Jada was left standing there, alone and frightened. She went back in the house to call Sabrina first and then John Phillips. Sabrina told her to sit tight, and she was on her way. John was concerned as well, but asked her for the information about the hospital and promised to keep her informed. He ended by wishing her good luck. At the hospital, the emergency room attending took the information from the paramedics and from JC and moved quickly to have Roz's stomach pumped. Within just a few minutes, Roz was breathing better and her pulse had strengthened, but the doctor chose to put her on a respirator. While she was still in serious condition, her vitals were stabilized. The doctor came out to pass the good news on to JC, with a warning that they still didn't know about any permanent damage. That would take a few more hours to confirm. They could only wait. JC called Jada and gave her what information she had, and Jada confirmed that she had contacted John Phillips and Sabrina and they would be at the hospital as soon as they could. JC tried to have Jada stay at home, but she wouldn't listen. She was coming, and that was that. In the meantime, Reese had just landed in Dallas, Texas, getting ready to connect to a flight to Springfield. He had not been informed of Roz's condition, and he was still looking forward to seeing Roz and the girls again. He had time to think while he was trying to survive in the jungles of Belize, and he realized what he was missing by his ill-conceived travel. He finally understood that all he was doing was trying to run away from the pain of Roz's betrayal. He had never tried to understand what drove her to do what she did, and he never gave her a chance to tell him what she was feeling and why she did it. She never blamed him for anything, including walking away from their marriage and later from their girls. He still couldn't understand that. How could he leave his two girls for over a year at this time in their lives? As he waited in the departure lounge for his flight, his new, disposable cell phone rang. It was John Phillips. In just a few words, he told Reese what had happened to Roz and gave him all of the information he had. He gave Reese Jada's cell phone number and let him know that he was available to help when Reese got into Springfield. Reese thanked him and told him he would hold him to that. He hung up and paced the lounge, waiting. He decided against calling Jada from there since there was nothing he could say or do to make a difference from here. He waited. At the hospital, Roz's condition improved from serious to fair, and the doctors began to be more positive in their assessments of her prognosis. JC and Jada were sent home with Sabrina to rest and get something to eat and finally to get some sleep. Roz was not likely to wake much before the next day, so there was little they could do. John Phillips called to let them know that Reese would be home by 10:30 that evening, and he would probably go straight to the hospital. JC called to give his name to the hospital staff so that he would be allowed in. She decided to stay at home and give their father time alone with their mother. She was hopeful, but could only wait and see. Reese arrived at the hospital just after 11 o'clock and was told to wait for one of the doctors. He sat down in the lounge, realizing finally that he was exhausted and hadn't eaten or slept for over 30 hours. He found himself beginning to drift as the quiet surrounded him. He was almost asleep when the doctor on call shook him awake. Are you Reese Del Gorio, husband of Rosalind Del Gorio? Yes, I'm Reese and I'm the ex. How is she? Is she going to be all right? She's stable, and her condition is fair right now. We have your name from your daughter, so I can give you all of the information we have. She is stable, her vitals are strong, and she seems to have recovered from the worst of the effects. It was intentional from what your daughter said. The doctor paused to allow Reese time to assimilate what he had already told him. He continued, "Your daughter found her very soon. We hope that the quick action by everyone minimized what could have been a very serious situation. We can only wait and see if there was any permanent brain damage from lack of oxygen. We should know in a few more hours. What if she doesn't wake up soon? Would that mean anything?" "Not necessarily. She may stay asleep for several more hours or several more days. There is no set time for this kind of thing. She should wake tomorrow, but perhaps not. We just have to wait." "Thank you. May I see her? I just got back to the States tonight, and I haven't seen her for over 2 years." "Of course. I'll have one of the nurses take you in. You can only stay a few minutes." He left, and within a few minutes, a nurse appeared, beckoning him to follow her. She led him down the hall to a room with the wall facing the corridor, all glass. He could clearly see the bed and the equipment from the hall, but was unprepared for the sight of Roz laying in the bed as he stepped into the room. The nurse told him to stay only a few minutes and left. Reese saw Roz, or at least her face. She was laying motionless, tubes running in through her mouth to help her breath, for lines dripping into her arm. A plastic monitor clip on her still hand indicating her pulse and lines going under the blankets to measure her heartbeat. As he moved closer, he saw her more clearly, her face a pasty white, her lips dry and cracked, her hair tangled and dirty and no motion at all. If he hadn't seen the monitors with their blue and red numbers flashing and the repeating graph of her heartbeat, he would have thought her dead. The mechanical repetition of the ventilator and the electronic beeping of the monitors were the only sounds in the room. The shock of seeing her this way was almost too much. Reese stumbled back until he felt a chair behind him and sat down heavily. At that moment, he realized that this was the woman he had loved for the last 20 years and the mother of the 2 most precious things in his world. It took a plane crash in a country that most people had never heard of, and seeing her like this to remind him of what he had walked away from. It reminded him of how short life could be and how little fate cared for the mistakes of mortal man. Reese was still sitting there when the nurse came in to lead him out. She seemed to understand the shock he experienced, and she made no attempt to talk to him or to give him false cheer. She led him back to the lounge where he finally began to function again. He knew that he should go home to see the girls and to make sure they were okay. Actually, it was no longer his home, but his girls were there. He called for a cab and let it take him back to the house on the lake that he had walked out of 2 years ago. Even though it was after midnight, the house was ablaze with lights. The cab let him out, and he walked slowly up to the front door. Just as he was ready to ring the bell, the door burst open and his oldest daughter ran into his arms. He held her there in the doorway as they both began to cry. It felt good to let go, and to have someone who understood perfectly what the other felt. They just held each other until the sobs and shudders subsided. Reese spent the rest of the evening with his 2 daughters and his ex-sister-in-law Sabrina. The mood was quiet and depressed, but lightened somewhat by his miraculous escape from his plane going down in the jungles of Belize. He was forced to relate most of the 7 days he spent trying to find his way back to civilization, and the girls hung on every word. It was enough to take their minds off of their mother, laying in the hospital. They finally fell asleep on the couch, curling up together. Reese and Sabrina talked for a while in the kitchen. "Were you aware of Roz's abuse? It appears she had a prescription for the antidepressants, but the pain pills were prescribed by a doctor I never heard of, and her name wasn't the one on the bottle. The girls never told me of a problem when I called. Honestly, Reese, I had no idea. After I sold the shares to you, and you finally walked out on her, Roz and I sort of drifted apart. I know she blamed me for the loss of the business, and anyway, Paul and I weren't in a good place. I guess I sort of let our relationship slide. We drifted apart, and the only time she called was when she needed someone to go someplace with the girls. She hasn't been out socially since the divorce." That's what the girls said too. I didn't know. Of course, I never talked to her at all, so I wouldn't have known anything. By the way, sorry about your divorce. You guys couldn't make it work, huh?
No.
Too much between us. We still see each other occasionally, but only as friends. Nothing more now or ever again. Sabrina looked at Reese with a calculated look. She decided to put it to him to see what his plans were. Now that she was here, she was worried about Roz's future health, not just this latest collapse. Reese, what are you going to do now? You are here, and you know Roz is going to be very fragile for a long time. Are you planning on staying around, or are you going to disappear again? If you are, it might be best if you don't stay till she wakes up.
I'm staying.
It took a lot to break through this wall I built around myself. I had taken myself out of circulation just as much as Roz. I didn't stay in the house, but I never let anyone else in either. I was just running as far and as fast as I could, running away from the pain she caused me. I didn't have the courage to stay and try to put my life back together again. I never allowed her to say the things she needed to say to move forward. I just dumped it all on her, and I took the high road and I walked out to salve my own wounds. I never even thought much about my own children, leaving them as well for the last year. Oh, I called. I did use a phone now, and then, but that's not giving much of myself. I just let them take care of the mess I left behind. Reese stopped for a moment to collect himself. It was hard, saying these things. He had endured a week of misery with time to think about nothing else. It was true what they say. When you are in danger of dying, your life passes in front of you. Sometimes the things you see are painful, especially when you realize that you put yourself first and your family second. When you realized you turned your back on another human being in pain. When you realized you behaved as if you had never done anything wrong and were free to condemn another who did. When you realized you could simply discard someone who had given you 17 years of their life and 2 wonderful children because of a mistake.
No, Sabrina.
I intend to stay here and try to make up for the pain I caused by leaving. I know that Roz was at fault in destroying our marriage, but she wasn't the one that left everything behind. I did that. She accepted the blame for it and wanted to make it right. All she asked was forgiveness. All I gave her was coldness and a callous disregard for her pain. I took the moral high road without regard for the life I was leaving for her and my children. I gave them the material things but took myself out of the picture. I put them aside in favor of my pride. Sabrina listened with a growing feeling of hope. If Reese could forgive Roz, it would make little difference to Roz what Reese did from then on. She would simply be content to know that he had forgiven her and that he would be there for the girls as their father. That was enough for Roz. She had never forgiven herself, but if Reese could forgive her, she could possibly do the same. Well, I'll stay tonight, and we can decide tomorrow what to do about the girls in school and all the other day-to-day crap that we still have to live with. I'll take the spare room so you can have the big bed. You probably need a real bed to sleep in after what you've been through. A bed would feel great. I don't think I've slept in the last 2 days, but I'll stay in the den like I used to so often. I'll be fine there, and I think the master bedroom is still a mess from the paramedics. They parted and both went to a fitful sleep. Reese had more trouble than he expected, partly because he was so exhausted that he was beyond sleep. He did finally get a few hours, but was already awake when the girls came in to wake him. They brought coffee, and he was grateful for the caffeine and the company. He had missed his girls so much, and he finally took the time to see them as they were now. They changed so much at this age that the almost 2 years he had been away made a tremendous difference. They were beautiful women now, not the little girls he had left behind. They all gathered at the kitchen table where Sabrina made a huge breakfast of eggs, ham, and hash browns. Reese was surprised at how much he put away. He hadn't had a really good meal now for over a month. Everything tasted wonderful. Sabrina and the girls watched in amusement as he shoveled food in his face. He grinned as he enjoyed. It was finally time that they could go to the hospital. Reese got the car from the garage, and he and the girls all went in together. Sabrina stayed behind to clean up and then follow them. She had hopes that things would begin to change. She crossed her fingers and said a small prayer. At the hospital, they were told to wait for the doctor before being admitted to ICU. Reese sat with the girls and tried to keep them calm until the doctor finally arrived. He was a young man that they hadn't seen before, and he sat down with them for a consult. He told them first that Roz was not awake yet, but that all signs were that she would wake soon. Her vitals were strong, and her physical condition was satisfactory. They had taken her off the respirator last night, and she was breathing fine on her own. That was a good sign. He was there primarily as a psych consult, and he wanted to ask some questions. Reese suggested that the girls be taken to the room while he and the doctor talked. When the girls were gone, Reese gave the doctor the background on the divorce, his leaving, and the intervening years. He was blunt and held nothing back. They talked for about 20 minutes before the doctor was satisfied. He seemed to have all he needed, and he rose to leave. He looked down at Reese and spoke. There is one thing that you have to do right now before you go into her room. You have to decide whether you are going to be here for her or not. If not, I would advise you to walk away now and let her find her own way back. If you intend to leave again as you did before, know that it would almost certainly result in this happening a second time, and the next time she will probably be successful. The choice is yours. With that, he turned and walked away. Reese watched him go with clamped jaw and clenched fists. It was anger he felt, and he wondered at himself. Why would he be angry? He knew that Roz loved him and had always loved him. She had hurt him deeply, and she had done so deliberately, but it was he that had struck the deepest wounds. She had no defense against what he did to her. She was already feeling guilt and remorse, and he then destroyed her in every way he could. Coldly, cruelly, and deliberately. He was no better than she, and in some ways worse. So why was he angry that people expected that he might walk away again? He relaxed his jaw and unclenched his fists. They were right. He had his pound of flesh once, and that was enough. They wouldn't become husband and wife again, and most probably they wouldn't become lovers again. But they were the parents of two wonderful girls that needed them, and that was a start. They could become friends eventually. He finally relaxed and let the relief of making a decision wash over him. He stood and walked to Roz's room. She was still unconscious when he entered the room. Sabrina and Jada were there, JC probably off talking with one of the nurses. She looked little different than she had the night before. He moved toward the bed and stood watching her face. She looked strange, without the light that he remembered always around her eyes, even when she was sad or angry. The life that was always there. Now, it seemed to be absent. He raised his eyes to Sabrina and then to Jada. Without speaking, they both rose and left, leaving him alone with Roz. He took a chair beside her bed and sat watching her. He noticed her hand, laying alongside her body, and reached for it without thinking. He took it and was surprised by how warm it seemed when she looked so cold. He kept it in his as he sat back. He was dozing, remembering the heat and the insects and the bone-crushing weariness as he struggled to find his way out of the jungles of Belize from where he crashed his plane. It had been a fuel line blockage that brought him down, fortunately giving him time to lose altitude and speed so that when he did come down, it was in some semblance of control. He could feel the whip of the branches across the canopy as he slid to a stop. He remembered the relief when he found he was still alive and in one piece. He began walking, following the sun toward what he knew to be a small town somewhere in the distance. He was just beginning his trek when he felt someone watching him. He looked around in fear, and the jolt brought him awake and back to the hospital room. He opened his eyes to see Roz awake and watching him. He dropped her hand and stood, ringing the buzzer for the nurse. He moved toward the bed then and took her hand again. She didn't speak, but she continued to watch his every move. She wouldn't take her eyes off of him. He finally moved over to her and spoke her name. Roz, can you hear me? Do you know who I am? She didn't answer, nor did her expression change, but he did feel her hand squeeze his. Her eyes blinked several times, and she opened her mouth to speak but couldn't form the words. He reached over for a glass of water and held her head up so she could drink. She took water greedily, and when she had her fill, he let her head back down gently. She sighed, moved her tongue over her dry, cracked lips, and finally spoke. Reese, you're alive? Am I dreaming, or are you here and alive? I'm here, Roz. I'm here, and you are the one we almost lost. Rest and let me get the girls.
No.
Don't leave. I want to see you and look at you. I thought I had lost you forever. I remember now. I knew you were dead and I didn't want to live. I tried to end it. I tried to join you, but I failed. Are you here now, really? I'm here now. Just rest until the doctor can see you. You're going to be all right, so just rest. I'll be here when you wake up again. I promise. Just then, the nurse came in, followed by the young doctor that he had spoken to earlier. Both moved immediately to Roz and began talking to her and taking her pulse and listening to her heart. The doctor peered into her eyes with his probe and finally moved back, smiling. Well, everything appears to be fine. I think you are going to make a full recovery thanks to the quick work of your daughters. You have some very fine young women there, Mrs. Del Gorio. You should be proud. Roz just smiled as he turned and walked away. She tried to move up to a sitting position, and with the nurse's help succeeded, just as Jada and Serena walked back in. Jade squealed as she noticed her mother's eyes open, and she ran to hug her. Serena followed and took her hand with tears barely contained. JC was quick to follow, and another reunion took place. Reese stood back and watched it all with a smile on his face. He left the room to allow them their time together. He sat down in the lounge, realizing how tired he was. It had been just over a week ago that he had fueled his plane and started back to the States to have dinner with his family. Now, a week later, nothing was as he had planned. He had crash-landed in a foreign country, walked for days to find civilization, and arrived back in Illinois to find his ex-wife had almost died and his whole family in a crisis brought on by his supposed death. He almost laughed, thinking no one could write a story any more bizarre. He was smiling to himself as Sabrina came out to tell him that Roz wanted to talk to him. She said she was going to take the girls out for lunch at McDonald's. She smiled and asked if he wanted her to bring anything back for him. He told her that he had been living on McDonald's in Costa Rica and couldn't think of a thing he wanted. He walked back into the room to find Roz looking much better. One of the girls had obviously brushed her hair and helped her with some lipstick. She was still pale, but now at least had some color back. She smiled at him as he walked in. She motioned to a chair and asked him to sit for a while. He did as she asked and smiled back. You look 100% better than the first time I saw you last night. You scared me, Roz. You looked like you were dead. I tried and I'm sorry. It was a cowardly thing to do. I have no excuse except that I thought you were dead. I know that's no excuse to do that to the girls, but I was not thinking very clearly. I know that now. Well, that's past. Now you just have to get well and strong and get home to the girls. They need you, Roz. Don't leave them again. I won't. Reese, I want to tell you so many things that I didn't get a chance to tell you before. So many things that I did wrong and things that I learned about myself that aren't pretty. I want to apologize for everything. I hope you'll give me the chance to say what I need to say to you. Roz, please, you don't have to do this. I've had time to think, and I discovered things about myself that I wasn't proud of. Between us, we screwed up a lot. But I want to tell you this before you start. I forgive you. For everything. I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me for what I did to you. Roz just stared at him and then began to cry. Not hard, crushing sobs, but a soft crying. Tears fell, and she let them. His words were the words she had waited to hear for the past 2 years. They were the words that she couldn't say to herself. She couldn't forgive what she had done, but he was asking her to forgive him, and he said he forgave her. She felt the pain fade, and her heart open up for the first time in so long. He forgave her. Nothing else was important now. She felt his arms around her, and she held on for dear life as she returned the embrace. It was going to be okay now. They had a life together, as friends and as parents. That was enough. It was all she needed to grow strong again and find her way. They could share their daughters and the joys of new life. They could watch as they found their own mates and had their own children and made their own mistakes, and they could be there for them when their world collapsed, as it was sure to do. It was life, the good and the bad, and she wanted it all. Now that she had someone to share it with, she would fight for every precious second of it. The end. In the end, this story serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring strength of forgiveness. It teaches us that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal with time, understanding, and compassion. Though their future remains uncertain, the story encourages us to cherish our relationships, communicate openly, and strive for forgiveness, even in the face of betrayal. It reminds us that redemption is possible and that life's trials can sometimes lead to unexpected and hopeful new beginnings. Thank you for watching.